So, my name is David Dowse. I am the senior partner in a company called Webb. We are a public relations company based here in Belgrade. And for the next hour, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the industry I work in, and specifically related to technology, which is your subject, and how technology has changed during the course of my career. We'll also look at how maybe it will change continuously in the future, and how you as the next generation can maybe bring those two together and have your own ideas about where to take public relations and communications in the future. We will make these slides available on SlideShare or something afterwards, so don't worry about trying to take notes. They'll be publicly available, probably on Monday. So first about me. I've had a lifetime career in PR so far. It's not finished yet. I have more to do. Before I came to Belgrade in 2006, I worked in some 26 countries. When I arrived in this region, I added 7 or 8 countries in 1 month. So that is full. No problem. Welcome. I came to Belgrade to be a regional director for a large international public relations company based here in Belgrade, and I did that job for 2 years. I was responsible for ex-Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, basically the Balkan region. And before I came, I didn't know very much about the region at all. After 2 years, I still didn't know very much about the region, but I knew enough that I liked it. So I decided to stay here in Belgrade, and we formed our own company, Dowse, in December 2007. We just celebrated 6 years of survival. Just quickly where we are. We're based in Belgrade. We operate throughout the Balkans with occasional crazy trips across the ocean to places like Algeria. We're specialists in this region now, and we're known as experts really in public relations and communications in the Balkan area. We're based here in Belgrade. I think I'd like to say something specifically about that. It's not by accident. It's not just because we like Belgrade. It is because increasingly international companies view the whole of this region as one market, and they inevitably see Belgrade as the center for business for that region. This is the position historically and is becoming that position again. If you look around at major corporations, Microsoft, Intel, for instance, basing their regional operations here in Belgrade, and they're servicing the whole of the region from here, not just Serbia. What do we do? Primarily, we work with major international companies. Our job is to provide consultancy, to provide advice, practical help with all aspects of communications. And that means the media, government, business partners, their employees, and so on. As I said, we're based here in Belgrade. We'll look some more during the presentation at how technology allows us to operate a very flexible business model. We like to think that we're leading the way in many ways in how we arrange our business on a large scale, but on a small operation. And IT plays a major part in that. I put a few reference logos during my career. These are some of the companies that I've worked with. Some of them you'll immediately know, maybe others you may not know so well. They're all very different businesses. We have financial services, we have technology, we have heavy industry, we have automotive, we have even the British Embassy. The one thing they have in common, and I'm very grateful to say this, is that they all took and take communications very seriously. Any major company that moves into this area is thinking about communication first. So what is public relations? Well, I could spend probably the next 10 years writing books to explain what public relations is, and I'm trying to make a very simple statement about a complex business. Public relations is really the planned management of a company's or a product reputation. Planned is a very important word. It's not accidental. We set out to achieve a particular reputation for a company or for a product, and we use a number of tools to do that. It is effectively the process of getting key messages clearly across to the right audiences, and we'll talk some more about that. Now, that's a very simplified way of explaining what public relations is. It sounds like it's advertising, doesn't it? It's not. And there's a very important difference to understand here with the concept. Advertising is what we pay other people to say. It can be a print advert, a TV advert, an advert in the movies, online. The important difference is that we're paying for the message to be communicated. On the other hand, our goal in public relations is that we persuade people to talk about you or your product or your company without being paid to do so. Now we have to ask ourselves, which would you believe more? A paid advertisement or someone whose opinion you trust and value? This is the difference between advertising and public relations. I use the word reputation. It's often said that the most valuable asset any company has is its reputation. This is why companies spend a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of resources to build a reputation. And there are lots of examples online. If you want some entertainment for an hour, Google PR disasters. And you'll find companies who spent years building reputations, and the chief executive, with a careless comment, destroyed it in minutes. There are lots of examples of that. There's also an example here of the fact that my keyboard, the Z and the Y are reversed. So the reputation can be destroyed. That, of course, should be destroyed. So reputation really matters. And believe me, working with major international companies, they take that very seriously indeed. Any threat to reputation is the number one priority. PR is a very powerful tool. There's been some research, this is some years ago in London when I was working there. That research showed that a recommendation of a product or a company by a trusted third party, and that can be the editor of a magazine, a journalist, a celebrity, even one of your friends. That recommendation has been measured as up to 8 times more powerful than the equivalent paid-for advertisement. And if we think about this just in a personal way, it's obvious, really. If a friend recommends a new Pleskowitzer place, we're likely to try it, if we trust the friend's judgment. If we see an advertisement on the roadside, new Pleskowitzer bar, maybe we will. But which one's more powerful? So in public relations, our role is to try to explain and persuade others to say positive things about our clients. This is a simple definition, and we often spend a lot of our time trying to prevent negative things. That's the other side of the story. And the last point on this slide, I've said, public relations success absolutely depends on credibility. Now, in times like these, when we're in an economic recession. The media, all forms of media, are under intense pressure. They need to find ways to raise money, and it's increasingly difficult to sell advertising. There is a big temptation for magazines to sell editorial. Pick up any magazine in Belgrade and you'll see an example of a paid-for editorial. The reason they do that is the psychology is known that the editorial is more powerful. If you believe it's editorial, you are more likely to believe it. But if we pay to put it there, it has no credibility. So this has a built-in danger for the whole industry of media. Undermine the credibility, everything gets lowered. Do you trust advertising? I suspect somebody's pretty good with Photoshop with this one. And obviously, we don't trust what we're seeing. It's an extreme example. On the other hand, this guy is a famous American sportsman who, at the end of his career, he was still very young, had a big interest in wine, and started to write blogs and columns about his interest in wine, recommending different kinds of wines. He's now become a star in a different way. And people have a lot of respect for his views. He's a celebrity already, so we care about what he says, and he's also very knowledgeable. My point here about credibility is very valid. If this guy was wearing a t-shirt with branding for some wine company, he's nowhere near as credible. We know he's selling, he's being paid to sell. But if he's not, and he says, Vranats is great wine, we're going to believe him. We're much more likely to. So this is editorial, that's advertising. I'm just trying here to set some sort of context, because the next part of today's lecture will take us on some sort of time journey. Before we do though, the very best recommendation, as I said, always comes from a trusted friend. It comes from someone whose opinion you respect. And in public relations we call this word of mouth. And it's the most powerful method of positive communication. But we have to ask the question always, where did our friend get their information? Did they get it from another friend? Did they read it in a magazine? Did they see an advertisement and they're repeating what they saw? And the final point on this slide, every time we read a magazine, see a TV program, it's good to remember that very little information that's published appears accidentally. It doesn't. It's planned. People like us put it there or help to. It's there for a reason. We should all be cynical at every media we read for those reasons. Any questions on the first part? Give me a rest. No. Okay. What I'd like to do now is take us on a little time journey. I think this comes from a TV program I used to watch when I was a kid. The role of technology in public relations. And I'm going to take us back to when I began as a very enthusiastic young executive around 1984. So we're looking at 3 decades of change. Really amazing changes, I hope you'll see. I would like to look at what changed in that time, maybe what's likely to change, that's guessing in the future, and has anything not changed during 30 years of crazy technology development. Well, hairstyles changed a bit, and fashion, but probably they're almost interchangeable. Okay. Anybody here not have a mobile phone? Of course not. And even if you forgot it, you would not admit it. Of course we all do. So I'm going to tell you two shocking things. First of all, this was what a mobile phone looked like in 1984. Which is shocking enough. Even more shocking, my first job as a young PR executive was to invent imagined case studies which would be published in magazines to try to convince people they needed mobile phones. I think we did a pretty good job. Now, believe me, this is impossible to imagine now, but that was the first role I had. So we had to imagine what could be a situation where I'd need a mobile. There's a telephone box, I can make a call if I need to. So we had to invent situations, and it would be a doctor on an emergency, or a builder in the top of a building or something. We imagined all these stories, magazines printed them. It was part of selling the concept of mobile phones. This is not ancient history. It's almost yesterday. I was there, I was doing it. So, this was a mobile phone. The battery life was about 15 minutes. You could make a call. Sometimes it would be successful. Receiving calls was almost never successful. If you wanted to go further than maybe outside your office, you needed an even bigger battery. One of these. I had one of these in my car. It was more useful for exercise than it was for making phone calls. And even with this thing, the battery would last 35, 40 minutes maximum talk time. These were the limitations at that time. And in that context, our job was to persuade people they needed. You need this, please buy this. And they were really expensive, as you can imagine. So this was mobile phones. This is where we began. We'll come back to this in a minute. I'd like to tell you how life was in my office when we were persuading people to buy mobile phones. This is a pen and a piece of paper. Now I'm going to admit nobody can read my handwriting. It's worse than this example here, that's not me. But we began the process of writing a press release then like this, with paper, with pen. We would draft a press release, we would make lots of corrections and a big mess, then write it again. And when we were happy with our written text, we would give it to a typist. The typist would type a copy of that. Then she would take it to the post office, put it inside an envelope, put a stamp, and post it to our client. Maybe it would arrive the next day if we paid for first class post. If we were trying to save money, we paid for second class. It could be 3 or 4 days. So the client receives a typed press release, opens the mail, reviews the press release, decides he or she doesn't agree with some of it, makes changes in pen. Back into the envelope, back to the post office, and back to our office. So we could wait 2 or 3 days for a client to approve the text. Then in our office we would finalize the text. Typist would retype it. Then we would make 200 envelopes or so, written with the addresses by hand. Put each press release into an envelope, sometimes with 200 copies of photographs, which were in the meantime made in the laboratory. Put them in the envelopes, take them to the post office, and post them to the editors of all of the journalists' magazines. Again, we wait another 2 or 3 days to make sure that the editor received our letter. And then we make a phone call to see, did they receive our press release? Was it interesting? How can we help you? The whole process has now taken at least 1 week. This was the process we used to persuade people they needed mobile phones. Part of my training, I visited a few editors' offices, which was an incredible experience, to see what happens at the other end. And some of our most important target editors allowed us to visit their office and to see their desk. They were receiving 200 or 300 press releases in envelopes every day. And this pile would build like this. 95% or more would just go straight to the waste bin. So this was, again, the way we were trying to promote mobile phones. Somewhere in this pile is my press release. Maybe here. And the editor is, this is boring, this is boring, this is boring. We had to find a way to make an impact. So this was process. And what you can see is it's very long, it's very slow, very frustrating. So after about 6 months or so, I was young, I was very enthusiastic. I liked technology, like all of you do. And I persuaded my boss we needed to get modern in our office. So he found a budget, and we bought an Amstrad PCW. And this is what my desk looked like. Does anybody recognize this? Of course you don't. It's actually a word processor. It was made by a company called Amstrad, who don't exist anymore. I think the next slide will tell you some things which might be interesting. That was what it was called. It had 256K of RAM. This was leading edge. I was really excited when we got this. The CPU ran at 4 megahertz. And it didn't have a hard drive. It used 3-inch floppy disks, which you may have seen in a museum, with a massive capacity of 1.4 megabytes. To load the word processing program, we loaded 8 of those disks to start it up. But they sold 8 million of them in the UK alone. This was the revolution that was going on in business, from the typewriter to this. And this was the technology we had. The screen looked great. So, this was the user interface. It's not even DOS. This is before DOS, and you can see. I think the capacity is there. It's 292K free on the disk drive. K. Capacity of about 20 documents, and as you can see, not exactly user-friendly. It's amazing to think this is yesterday. When it came to printing, the Amstrad PCW was connected to something called a daisy wheel printer, which was effectively an electronic typewriter driven by the word processor. Now, because everybody's probably still half asleep, I'm going to entertain you with the sound of a 1984 office. So, this is a very similar setup with a very similar printer, and we're now about to print a press release to send to our client. This happened 10-15 times during the day, every day. And this would be the sound against which we were working and talking in the office. And as we got busier, this sound was continuous. We had 2 or 3 of them. It sounded like a road repair The entire day. That's more than I need of that. But you get the idea. So imagine being in one room with three of those, three people working, and this continuously going on. It's very basic. It almost feels prehistoric now. The next wonderful piece of technology was a fax machine. And I read some magazine that there were these new machines available. This is a very old one, but I like the picture. I again talked to my boss, and 3 times he said, no, we don't need one of those. And his reason was, nobody else we know has a fax machine. Why would we buy one? Nobody else has one. But of course, inevitably, we did buy a fax machine. With the fax machine and the Amstrad PCW, we had a really modern office. And what was the difference in how we actually worked? So the executive, that's me. I learned to type. Only 2 fingers, but quite fast. I would type onto the green screen, press the button, make a very loud noise, as you saw, print it myself. Then, instead of posting to the client, we go to the fax machine, feed it in, it arrives in his office, same day. The client then makes their manual changes, faxes it back again. And then we go the same process, photocopying to the post office to send it all to the editors, because mostly they didn't have fax machines. But increasingly, of course, journalists, editors got fax machines, and we started sending things that way. The saving, and this is the very important part of this technology change, you can already see we saved several days in that process. Unfortunately, we also lost one job in the office. We no longer needed a typist, because we were all typists. And it's difficult to remember now, but at that time, every manager at every level had a secretary, had a typist, because they were unable to do anything themselves. And what then happened in the next 10 years or so was that we all became independent units ourselves, as we absolutely are now, working as modules in a team, but we're self-contained. This was a really major change. So by 1990, I was really enthusiastic about technology. I really didn't like paper. And everybody then was talking about the paperless office will come. And I was really, really happy to hear that. I'm still waiting. It didn't happen. This isn't my office, but I have seen offices that look like this now, and I don't expect to see truly paperless offices anytime soon. We still need paper. Important lesson here was, I think it's very dangerous to make predictions about where technology may or may not take us. It has its own way of sorting things and its own outcomes. So I'm still waiting for the paperless office. So we have word processor, we have a fax machine, we are a modern office. That greatly improved our efficiency. But we're still very dependent on the postal system to deliver things. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. What we needed was a way to send files directly from my green screen word processor directly to the client, or directly to a journalist or an editor. What we needed was email, even though we didn't know that's what it was called. So along came Windows. I was very proud to be the first, I think, in our whole office building to have a copy of Windows 3.0. This is what it looked like. It was only available in black and white. But you can see it's Windows. And if I flick to the day before, that's what we were working on. And now along came Windows. It made managing documents, working with documents, a lot easier, even though I think you can even see from this screen there's very little software on here. There was a very simple write word processor. Paintbrush, which still exists in Windows, and they didn't even improve it, I don't think. Very simple programs, but the main thing was the interface was much easier to learn, much easier to work with. Does anyone know what this is? It's a modem. One of the very first modems. I had a phone like this in my office. And this was a new phone because it had touch buttons and not one of those. So it was using digital pulses, which means you could use it with a modem. This fantastic machine took sound output from the phone, turned it back into digital, and tried to connect to the internet. We're back to soundtracks. I grew up with this noise. Isn't it amazing? And the really terrible thing is that probably 90% of the time it would not connect the first time. So you would need to do it again and again. This was modem connection. Very exciting stuff. So what did it give us? It gave us a fantastic maximum speed of 14.4 bits per second. Now that translates into 9 minutes to download 1 megabyte of data. Now, I'm sure you remember early websites when you would watch the screen fill very slowly. This was the same for text. Not for videos or for photos, but for text messages. It was incredibly slow. And it was really only practical for short text-based messages. Does anybody know CompuServe? Probably not. CompuServe came along as a very early version of the internet. It was produced by a company which I think then became America Online, or AOL. And it was a kind of forum-based pre-web internet with a number of different forum rooms which were specific to interests. Effectively, it gave us an email platform which we could use when we were traveling. And this became very important to me because around this time I started traveling in my career, and this is when the 26 countries started. And it was possible to, if you could get online to access CompuServe, you could then be online and connect with your office, if you could connect with CompuServe. So this is a bunch of cables that was in my suitcase when I used to travel. And because phone sockets are different in every country, we sometimes had some adapter which would work. Most of the time we didn't have an adapter, we had a screwdriver. And I would, in the hotel room, remove the cover from the telephone box and use these two small clips to try to find the right two wires, and then beep, 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 try and connect. And I'm happy to say
I managed to do that from a hotel room in Buenos Aires in Argentina in 1991. I was very proud of that. I'm not sure anybody did it before then. But I sent an email from there to my office in London. This was email. Email had arrived. It was very slow. It was very unreliable. It was very frustrating. And in the beginning, at least, only a very few people could use it. But it had arrived, and of course, nothing would ever be the same again for any of us. Even now, I'm now talking to people who, especially my son, who's a teenager, who tells me that email is dead already. But that's another story. So what changed with email? A lot of things. First of all, we had much faster exchange of information, of files with our clients. And within a year or so, some editors started accepting material from us by email. Now, for the editors, something new came along with that, because they now had word processing too. They were no longer reading a printed press release and retyping the parts they wanted. They had a text that they could copy and paste. Copy and paste was born, and that changed everything too. How did it affect our industry? Well, first of all, we could do everything much faster. Editors, who are primary targets, they always like hot news now, right now. Also, if our writing was good enough, the editor could simply cut and paste our text and put it straight into the magazine or a newspaper, which was a #1 result for us, because it was likely to say the things we want said about our clients. At the same time, we could do more with less people and faster. It meant we were more efficient and the company was more profitable. And this really was a revolution. In my office, we started with, I think, with 12 people. By the time we reached this point, we had 3, and we were doing double the work. This is a theme that's continued ever since then. So before I push the fast forward button, I hope you liked the history lesson. Any questions on what we've just been looking at? No. I'll have to ask you some questions then. Well, of course, that's, yeah, absolutely. This is the reason I wanted to include this, because I want to put this in some context. And what we'll do now is look at where we are now and where it's likely to go. Because this was a revolutionary change in a few years, absolutely, and really exciting. I'm really glad that I was there through that. It was all happening, and it still is happening. That's my message to you. So let's fast forward. This is my BlackBerry. It's not even the best BlackBerry, but it's okay, it does what I need it to do. And this model has 32 gigabytes of memory. It's working at 1.2 gigahertz processor in here. Let's just remind you of something. Okay, this is in my career. This is not ancient history. This is in my career. That to this. So, what's the work environment now look like? I started by telling you the Webb Dowse is working all over the Balkans region. We have team members located in several different countries. We're continuously traveling. We're collaborating on common projects with members of teams changing all the time, collaborating together. We have clients based in London, in Brussels, etc. We have a mixture of people who are working at home, sometimes in the office, sometimes remotely, sometimes at clients' offices, sometimes in hotel rooms, and sometimes on planes and trains and buses. All of that is enabled by technology. Our whole way of working is different. And I think if I took myself back to that first office, I could not possibly imagine that in my career we would reach this point where with this I can do all of that. I can send an email to an editor right now and the editor can respond right now in real time. Remember, we started with at least a week to this. And of course, technology is absolutely fundamental. So broadband, satellite internet in some places, 3G on here, I'm looking at 4G already. It's too expensive, but it looks pretty good to me. Cloud, Skype, all of those things are all part of our way of working and will increasingly be so. I think there are some really big advantages for this. It means as managers, we have to be open to new models, to new ways of doing things. It's no longer about who's in the office from 8:30 until 5:30. I personally don't care where my team is. I do care about the results. So that frees people, and that frees creativity, and it frees people to have good work-life balances and so on. It's a really liberating use of technology. In terms of talking to our clients, information is now exchanged instead of in days, in minutes, instantly, not hours. That model I explained about distributing a press release. One click, one database, everything goes. Of course, we can use rich context, we can use hyperlinks, we can embed videos, and we do all of those things. So that the output from us is much more complex and much more, hopefully, much more interesting and valid for the editors who receive it. And of course, we have Google. We have the most incredible research tool in our pocket. We used to do research in the 90s too, and that would be half a day at the library. Which as a young executive I quite liked, because I was allowed out of the office for half a day, could probably have a coffee and a sandwich somewhere. I'm researching in the library. You'd be reading, literally reading magazines, books. That was how we did research. Now, massive change. I think what you can see from all of this is what's happened is everything's speeded up dramatically. Everything's accelerated from days to hours to minutes. Everything accelerated, and my message is that it's continuing to accelerate. It's very easy for any of us to think where we've got to is where we're getting to, and this is it. The technology we have is what we'll work with. It's still changing, and I think it's changing even faster now than it was in the 1990s. One of the challenges that this gives to the PR industry, to my industry, my profession, is that if we have a problem in communication, we used to have days to consider what's our reaction. Now we have minutes to consider, and that really throws a big challenge at anybody who's involved in communication. Then we've added all of this. I'm sure all of you have Twitter and Facebook on your phones. I guess almost all of you will have updated something this morning already. Maybe even during the lecture. I hope you said something good if you did. The point is, we all of us now have the ability right here to publish anything we want to immediately. We can say whatever we like, and it's published instantly to anybody in the world who also has internet access. That is an awesome thought. I just said something. It's out there. Of course, we can also get instant feedback. The moment I say something, somebody can say, I don't agree with you, or I do agree with you. Feedback can be good, it can be bad, it can be indifferent. And I'm sure all of us have been on the end of all of those things. Good comments, bad comments, even attacks from people we don't know. That happens. In public relations, this is a major opportunity for companies. It's also a really big threat. And believe me, companies take this really seriously. Everybody for the past 5 years that I've worked with in the corporate offices is talking about how do we manage our social media presence. There are no straightforward answers to that question. This is a really important thing. We have the power in our pocket to say anything we want to say, and for the whole world to hear it. The question is, do we actually have anything that's worth saying? And this is what we as individuals have to consider. Is anyone really interested where I have my coffee this morning? This is how we started with Facebook some years ago, but that's no longer a valid thing to post. Companies have a similar problem. They can say something, but what? What will they say? And it's our role as advisors in communication to help them to formulate what they should say, and then how to say it. Social media is a game changer, but even before Twitter and Facebook and all the rest of them came along, I was advising clients many years ago that I believe very firmly that communication is a two-way process. It's very important to listen before you try to speak. That means understanding the audience. Who are you trying to talk to? How do they feel about the subject? What are their views? Social media gives us a very unique access to that kind of interaction, two-way dialogue, because it lets us get opinions from people. It also gives companies a very powerful tool to make an instant correction if somebody's saying something wrong. But you can imagine the resource that a major company needs to monitor Twitter, Facebook, all online social media, and then react to anything which is being said as a criticism of that company. The problem is speed, and it's the same effect from the good things I said about speed, also has a downside. So what's the threat? Public relations practice is primarily about trying to control key messages. It's extremely difficult. I'm going to say it's impossible, actually, to control messages on social media. And that's simply because of the speed of development of stories. So a story, that could be a good story or a bad story, can develop very fast in a social media network within minutes, and it's global. The problem is that companies, especially large companies, simply are not organized in a way to react fast. So somebody's making an accusation about a bank, let's say. The bank has legal advisors. The bank has a board of directors, all of who have their own opinions about what should be done and said. They will have a director of communication whose job it is. All of those people will want to have an input into what's being said. The problem is, it's already too late. You didn't move fast enough. The story has really exploded. And the internet is full of examples of that. Companies have to learn to react much more quickly and get their version of the story out. They're simply not ready for that. And if we're talking about the challenge for the next generation in my industry, that's the one that I think a lot of people will be focusing on. What's the response to that? I don't know the answer. So, we looked at a bit of history and a bit of now. I'll move on to look at a little bit about the future. The only thing that's constant is change. This is a well-known phrase. Another version is there's only two things certain. One is death and the other is taxes. It doesn't stay the same, and it won't stay the same. The only thing I can be sure about is the technology that I am now familiar with in 5 years will be different. I'm not going to try to guess where technology may take us. You know much more about what's possible with that. But I think we can probably expect a few things from the point of view of the public relations industry. In the next 5 to 10 years, I think we'll see the end of most printed magazines and newspapers. Not all, they're already failing everywhere. We'll have maybe 10% of the current printed output. We're also already seeing the end of the traditional TV platforms. We have content on demand. And that's where the direction of travel is. And this all throws big problems at companies who want to communicate with their audience. How do they identify where their audience is, what they're watching? We can skip the ads, easy. My son, who's 13, he loves to multitask. He can be watching a movie on a screen, playing a video game, exchanging texts with his friends all at the same time. He's perfectly happy with that. He's probably listening to music as well. Drives me crazy, but that's the environment he's growing up in. He's uncomfortable if there's only one source of information coming. It also means that the attention span for each of those channels is smaller and smaller and smaller. He tells me he's aware of all of them. I find that hard to believe. So we've got attention spans reducing, more images, more videos, fewer words, and multitasking with all of this media. A lot of companies would very much like to access my 13-year-old son and try to sell him things. How? In that context, how would you do that? He doesn't read magazines. He doesn't watch any particular TV programs. He's gaming. He's online with his friends on Facebook. Probably some platforms I don't even know. How do we reach him? I read an article last week that the end of Facebook is already being discussed. I've only just got used to it. And I find it fascinating that people are able to analyze the direction that Facebook is going and its eventual end, and possibly what may or may not replace it. And the article I read was talking about a version of YouTube taking over the ground where Facebook now is. This will be another big challenge for companies because a lot of companies are now putting big efforts and budgets and energy into managing Facebook. They're backing an old technology already. They're not ahead of the game, they're following the game. This is a good message for all of us. Again, back to this. This changes the entire game of media. We're all journalists. We're all photographers. Look at what happened in North Africa a couple of years ago with the Arab Spring and the revolutions. They were all driven, managed by Twitter and Facebook and BlackBerry messaging. And the governments at the time were desperate to find a way to control that. And in the end, the only thing they could do was to switch off the mobile networks, take the power off to try to stop people communicating. So I think the very big question for everybody in this room and anybody involved in IT and in communications in the future is the last point on this slide. Will governments find a way to control social media, Twitter, Facebook, and so on? They're certainly trying to do that. And I heard in China, for instance, when Google entered the Chinese market, Google had to negotiate with the Chinese government, and Google were forced to agree some terms. And the conditions are that there are whole areas of internet which are closed if you're searching Google in China. In other words, the Chinese government found a way to restrict Google. They're restricting the internet. This is a very scary thought, I think. On the other hand, many years ago, I remember talking with a journalist in Hong Kong, and he said, you know, the Chinese will never control what's happening with media. So I said, well, why do you think? He said, well, he heard that some Chinese farmers in a village found a way to make a satellite dish from a wok. And then he said, how many woks do you think there are in China? It's a good joke, but it has an element of truth in it. Governments will try to restrict access to information. And people will try to find ways to break that. This is human nature. Now, all of what I've been talking about is to try to set some context for you, to talk about how technology has played its part in my career and the business that I'm involved in. But now we're coming to my main message for you today. And that is that through all of that, and it was a really exciting time to live through, still is, in the principles of good communication, public relations, there are principles that remain valid now as they were in 1984, and I believe will continue to remain valid. This is the thing that didn't change through all of that. And you're all in IT. I'm interested in IT, excited by it, but we all have to remember that technology is a tool. It's a very powerful tool, and in this case it's a very powerful tool for listening and a very powerful tool for delivering messages. But it is a tool, it's under our control. We decide what we do with it. And I'm very happy to say that people still react on a very personal, human level to what they hear and see. And I think that gives us a lot of hope for the future. So the golden rules, the ones that didn't change. And this, I can go right back to the very beginning when we were writing by hand. The first thing is to understand your audience. Who are you trying to communicate with? This can be about demographics, about age groups, about gender, about social status. Fix clearly who you're trying to address with a particular message. When you know who they are, then you ask the next question, what's important to those people? What do they care about? How do they think and they feel about particular issues, particular products? What's important to those people? Next is to understand the media. This is your channel to reach the audience you just defined. And I'll go back to my 13-year-old son. How do we reach him with his gaming and his texting? He's a target. And as he gets older, he will become more of a target. He'll have money to spend. Still my money, but anyway. So what are the best channels to reach the audience? And then we ask ourselves in our industry, what does the media want from us? Because we want them to cooperate. And one of the most powerful things I've done in my career was to meet editors and ask them, what do you want from us? How can we help? A lot of PR people don't do that. When we've done our homework, our job then is to make really clear and simple, consistent messages. And no matter how complicated the story is, and we've worked with some very complex technology stories, some very complex industrial stories, people need simplified, clear way to understand things. A big part of our job in public relations is exactly that process. Take a lot of information, make it simple, break it down, and keep it very consistent. Once we have that, this is a key message, then we repeat it, and repeat it, and repeat it, and repeat it consistently. That is how communication works. And finally, through all of that, actions always speak louder than words. Now, I tell you one story with this. I had a very successful client in the beginning, industrial manufacturer. We worked for them for 2 years, I think, and we had a really big success with them. And then I had a call from the managing director to go and have a meeting. And he said, David, I'm really pleased with the work you've done promoting our company, but I have a problem. Maybe you can help. He said, everything is now great, we're selling a lot of products, but we have a terrible reputation for our service, after sales service. Can you help fix that? And I told him, no, I can't help you fix that. You fix it, and then we'll tell people. No amount of good communication will cover or fix a fundamental problem in a company's organization. We have to help them, persuade them to make the change, and then we can tell people how good they are and what they've done. Action's always louder. So I'm coming to an end, and I'm going to ask you to ask me some questions. This is about career opportunities. That's why we're here. What is all this about for you guys? You understand technology way better than I do. You've been studying this. Hopefully I've given you some ideas about how that can and is impacting on real life business. This is day-to-day happening all over the world. And I think if you put that together with what we've just been talking about as the fundamentals of good public relations, which do not change, in my view, then you have a really good formula available to you for the future. So I hope some of that was interesting, useful, and please feel free to ask me any questions. Otherwise, I really will have to find one for you. Anybody? No questions and no snowballs. I don't know. Thank you. Was it interesting, please? I need some feedback from you. Yeah. Good. So I guess you were not expecting a history lesson today, but there is a point of doing it that way. I wanted to just set the context of how things have changed. And they will continue to change, and it's going to be you guys doing that. So thanks for coming, thanks for listening. We will put the slides online somehow on Monday. If anybody would like to speak to me separately, I'm here. Thanks for coming.